7 years.
That is how long the greatest hero of the Trojan War has been a prisoner. Not in a dungeon, but in paradise. On a lush, hidden island at the edge of the world, a goddess named Calypso has kept him, fed him, loved him, and offered him something no mortal is ever offered: eternal youth, forever at her side. And every single day, he walks down to the same rock on the shore and weeps, staring at a sea that will not carry him home. This is where Homer's Odyssey truly begins, not with the 10-year war he already won, but with the 20 years it takes him to get back from it. Every other Greek king who survived Troy sailed home long ago. Only Odysseus is still out there, and on Mount Olympus, the gods are arguing over whether he ever gets to stop. His wife Penelope is still waiting, fending off a palace full of men who want her to give him up for dead. His son has grown from a baby into a young man who has never once heard his father's voice. And somewhere between a monster's cave, a witch's island, and the edge of the underworld itself, an old grudge from a blinded giant is waiting to make sure he suffers every mile of the way home. The poem is the Odyssey, composed by the poet or poets we call Homer, somewhere around the 8th century before Christ. Most likely centuries of songs, carried by memory from singer to singer, long before anyone wrote a word of it down. It is the sequel to the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War, and it opens by asking the goddess of poetry herself to sing the tale. Butler's 1900 translation begins, "Tell me, O Muse, of that ingenious hero who travelled far and wide after he had sacked the famous town of Troy." Hold on to that word, ingenious. Our hero, Odysseus, is not the strongest man in Greek legend, or the fastest, or the most beautiful. He is the cleverest, the man of 1,000 tricks, disguises, and lies, even to the people who love him most. That cunning is exactly what got him through 10 years of war. We are about to find out whether it is enough to get him home. Here is where we pick up the story. It is the 10th year since the fall of Troy, and the gods have finally agreed among themselves that Odysseus has suffered enough. Only one god disagrees: Poseidon, ruler of the sea, who despises him for a crime we have not gotten to yet, and who will spend the rest of this story trying to drown him, delay him, and break him before he ever reaches home. While the gods argue on Olympus, 2 other stories are already moving without him. On the island of Ithaca, his son Telemachus, now grown, watches his father's palace being devoured by more than 100 suitors who have moved in uninvited, courting his mother, draining his inheritance, and waiting for him to either die quietly or give up the throne. And on her hidden island, Calypso is about to receive a visitor she will not want: the messenger god Hermes, carrying an order straight from Zeus. Let him go. What follows is a war hero's 20-year fight against monsters, gods, witches, and ghosts. All of it just to get back to an ordinary life on a small rocky island most other men would never have looked at twice. First, the prisoner of paradise. When Hermes lands on Calypso's island with the god's command, she is furious, heartbroken, and, this is the detail Homer lingers on, genuinely in love. Butler tells us plainly that Odysseus, though he was longing to return to his wife and country, was detained by the goddess Calypso, who wanted him for her husband. She offers him, one final time, immortality, a chance to never grow old, never die, never grieve again, if he will simply stay. He says no. He would rather be a mortal man on a hard little island, growing old beside an aging wife, than a god in someone else's paradise forever. So Calypso, weeping now herself, helps him build a raft with his own hands. Timber cut, planks lashed, a single sail raised, and for the first time in 7 years, he pushes out alone onto the open sea. He is 17 days into the crossing, land finally in sight, when Poseidon spots him from the mountains of a distant country and decides that one drowning man is exactly what this voyage has been missing. He summons every wind at once. The sea rises into cliffs of black water. The raft is torn apart like kindling, and Odysseus, the man who survived 10 years of war without a scratch, is left clinging to a single plank in a storm built by a god who wants him dead. He survives only because another goddess, Ino, takes pity and lends him her veil to keep him afloat. 2 days and 2 nights he is battered through open water, with no food, no rest, and no land in sight, until on the 3rd day the wind finally drops, and he crawls, naked, salt-crusted, and half-dead, onto an unknown beach, and collapses into the bushes to sleep, with no idea whose kingdom he is washed up in, or whether they will help him or kill him. 2nd, into the cave of the Cyclops. Rescued and fed by a foreign king who asks to hear his story, Odysseus finally tells the room, and us, everything that happened after Troy fell. It began simply enough. After 9 days blown off course, his ships landed among the Lotus-eaters, a people who offered his men a strange, sweet fruit. Any man who ate it lost every wish to go home, wanted nothing but to sit and eat more lotus forever, and had to be dragged back to the ships in tears. Then came the cave. Scouting for supplies on an unfamiliar island, Odysseus and 12 of his best men wandered into an enormous cavern stacked with cheeses and pens of sheep, and were sealed inside it by a boulder no 10 men could move the moment its owner came home. Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant, a Cyclops, ate 2 of Odysseus's men on the spot for dinner, and 2 more the next morning for breakfast. There was no fighting a creature that size in a cave with 1 exit. So Odysseus lied. He got the giant drunk on strong wine, and when Polyphemus asked his name, he answered, "My name is Noman. This is what my father and mother and my friends have always called me." That night, while the giant slept off the wine, Odysseus and his surviving men drove a sharpened, fire-hardened stake into his single eye. The giant's scream brought every Cyclops on the mountain running to his cave, shouting to ask who was hurting him, and Polyphemus, blind and roaring in the dark, gave them the only true answer he had. "No man is killing me by fraud. No man is killing me by force." His neighbors, hearing that no man was attacking him, told him to stop shouting and go back to sleep. Odysseus had won, and, laughing as his ship pulled away, he made one last mistake. He shouted his real name back at the shore, so the giant could curse it by name. His father, it turned out, was Poseidon. The god of the sea now had someone to hate. 3rd, witches, ghosts, and a warning. The next island belonged to Circe, a beautiful enchantress who welcomed Odysseus's men into her hall, fed them a feast laced with drugs, and touched each one with her wand, turning them into pigs, still with human minds, trapped, screaming inside animal bodies. Only quick action and a protective herb given to him by the god Hermes kept Odysseus from the same fate. When her wand failed against him, Circe was so startled by his resistance that she fell in love with him instead, freed his men, and kept the whole crew a full year as honored guests. But when it was finally time to leave, she gave him the strangest instruction of the entire poem. "Before you can go home," she said, "you must sail to the edge of the world and speak with the dead." So Odysseus crossed into the land of the departed, dug a trench, and poured out blood to draw the ghosts to him. And among the shades, who came to drink and speak, was the spirit of his own mother, who had died of grief waiting for him, and whom he could not even embrace, his arms closing on empty air 3 times. And there, too, waited the blind prophet Tiresias, the only ghost still granted the power of true sight, who told him plainly what lay ahead. Monsters he could survive if he stayed careful, a temptation that could destroy his entire crew if his men did not, and, if he ever made it home at all, one final test waiting for him even then: a house full of armed men who did not want him back. Fourth, the price of the voyage. Warned now, Odysseus faced the trials one by one. He sailed past the Sirens, whose song was so beautiful it lured sailors to wreck themselves on the rocks just to hear more of it, surviving only by stuffing his crew's ears with wax and having himself lashed to the mast, so that he alone could hear the song and live, screaming to be freed, while his men rowed on, deaf to his own orders, exactly as he had told them to. He threaded the narrow strait between Scylla, a 6-headed monster who snatched sailors straight off the deck, and Charybdis, a whirlpool that could swallow the whole ship, and lost 6 men to Scylla's jaws in the seconds it took to pass, screaming his name as they were carried off, and he could not save even one of them. And then came the mistake that ended almost everyone. Starving on an island sacred to the sun god, with Odysseus asleep and his men certain they would die anyway, the crew slaughtered and ate the god's own sacred cattle. The sun god demanded justice from Zeus and got it. The moment they set sail again, a single bolt of lightning split their ship in half, and the sea took every man Odysseus had left. Not one survived. He clung to a broken plank, alone again, exactly as he had been in Poseidon's storm. Except this time, there was no crew left to save, and no ship left to lose. Of the 12 ships and hundreds of men who had sailed with him out of Troy, Odysseus alone remained, and it was in this state, hollowed out and utterly alone, that the sea finally carried him to Calypso's island, where 7 more years of comfortable, aching captivity were waiting for him, which is exactly where this story, and ours, began. Fifth and last, the beggar and the bow. Once free of Calypso's island and delivered at last to Ithaca by a friendly foreign crew, Odysseus does not stride home in triumph. The goddess Athena disguises him as a filthy, ragged old beggar, and in that disguise he walks into his own palace unrecognized, forced to watch the suitors mock and abuse him, waste his wealth, and court his wife, while he says nothing and waits. His son Telemachus, meanwhile, has just returned from his own journey across Greece, searching for any news of his father, has survived an ambush the suitors set to kill him on the way home, and is the only person in the house Odysseus dares to reveal himself to. Father and son, meeting as strangers, who instantly recognize what the other is willing to risk. Penelope, who has held off remarriage for years by weaving a burial shroud by day and secretly unraveling it every night, finally sets an impossible test. She will marry whichever suitor can string her husband's great bow and shoot an arrow clean through a row of 12 axe heads. One by one, every suitor fails. Not one can even bend it. Then the beggar asks to try. He strings the bow as easily as a musician tuning a lyre and sends the arrow clean through every axe. In the same instant, the disguise ends and the killing begins. A slaughter of every suitor who had spent years devouring his home. But the true ending of the poem is quieter than the blood. Even now, Penelope will not simply believe him. She has been fooled before, and she tests him one final time, ordering a servant to move their marriage bed out of the bedroom. Odysseus flares up in genuine anger because he alone knows what she knows. That bed cannot be moved. There was a young olive growing within the precincts of the house, in full vigor and about as thick as a bearing post, he tells her, and he built their entire bedroom around that living tree, carving one of its bedposts from the still-rooted trunk itself. Only the two of them have ever known this secret. When he describes it, Penelope's knees give way, and she runs to him weeping, and 20 years of the longest way home in all of literature finally, quietly, end. So what does all of it add up to? Strip away the monsters and the gods, and the Odyssey is really about one thing: the almost impossible pull toward home, and everything that tries to make a person forget it. Calypso offered Odysseus a paradise that was not his, and he chose a hard little island instead. The Lotus offered his men sweet forgetting, and he dragged them back to the ships in tears rather than let them stay. Even his own cleverness, the trick that saved him in the Cyclops' cave, nearly destroyed him because he could not resist shouting his real name back at the shore, trading a clean escape for 20 more years of a god's revenge. And the bed, built around a tree still rooted in the ground, told his wife the one thing no imposter could ever fake: that some things are not supposed to move. We are trained to admire the person who leaves, who conquers, who sails off into something bigger. Homer, 3,000 years ago, quietly admired the opposite: the man who turns down eternity itself and spends 20 years fighting his way back to an ordinary rock, an aging wife, and the smoke of his own chimney. Here is the one thing to carry out of this story into your week. The monster you can see is rarely the one that gets you. It is the lotus, the sweetness that asks for nothing, that feels like rest, like reward, like harmless comfort, right up until you look up and a year is gone and you have quietly forgotten where you were even trying to go. This week, name your own Ithaca, the person, the work, the life you are actually rowing toward, clearly enough that no comfortable island can make you forget it. And when you find yourself somewhere sweet and easy that is not quite your real life, do the unglamorous thing Odysseus does again and again. Build the raft. Get back in the boat. The people waiting for you are not on the pleasant island. Homer spent 12,000 lines proving one thing: that the bravest act in the world is not leaving, but returning. Turning down an easy heaven to fight your way back to a hard, ordinary, and entirely real life. Odysseus was offered immortality and chose instead to grow old as a husband, a father, and a king on a rock most other men would never have looked at twice. If this walk through the Odyssey gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time, we trade the wine-dark sea for the still mountains of ancient China, and a sage named Lao Tzu, who says the secret to mastering your life is to stop trying to master it at all, the Tao Te Ching. And tell me in the comments, What is your Ithaca, and what is the lotus trying to make you forget it?